Well, Ross is going to come now and tell us a little bit more about mountains.
I've been thinking about mountains. A bit lower. Okay, how are we going? I've been thinking about mountains, but I've also been thinking about the whole world. Okay, so the whole world, cosmos is a word that gets used sometimes. So when you think about cosmos, what do you think of? The world. The world? The universe. Outer space. Anything else? Creation, what? Cosmopolitan. Okay, cosmos, cosmopolitan, the whole world in one city. Oh, that's a great idea. I might use that in my sermon. Okay, right, okay. What's that? Trinity. Infinity. Excellent. Okay, so I need to stand back, which is that better? Okay, right. Can I stand over here? Yeah, okay, right. Okay, well, I'm going to teach you the middle line of the Lord's Prayer, and then I'm going to tell you what that has to do with cosmos, and it might not be what you think. The middle line of the Lord's Prayer, and you can stand up and sign it with me, goes like this. Heaven, same world. Okay, let's sign it. You don't, yeah, you can stand up. Heaven, same world. Right, you can sit down. Now there's heaven and the earth, or world, down here, and that's kind of like the whole universe, isn't it? The heavens can be like the skies. Sometimes we refer to the skies as the heavens. But there's another idea which comes from Greek thought, and Greek is the language the New Testament was written in. And that's where the word cosmos comes from. And the Greeks didn't think of cosmos just as created world, and the world and the heavens and the whole universe. They also thought of it as ordered, arranged, decorated. So we might think that the earth travels around the sun, and that the sun travels around this black hole in the middle of a great big galaxy. That's part of the order or the arrangement of the cosmos. Now, there's another example of the word cosmos, which I might get to later, which is decoration. How many of you would have think of the word cosmos as related to the word for decoration? Anybody? What about the word cosmetics? Okay, surprisingly enough, and I didn't think about this either until this last week, those two words are related because they are making beautiful or adorning things. And so I'm going to be speaking about mountains and cosmos a bit later. Lewis, did you want to do something else now? So just remember, heaven, same world. And we're asking God's, there's a bit of order. In English, we say, on earth as it is in heaven. But in sign language, they say heaven first, because God's will is done in heaven. And we want the same to be done in the world. Cool. Do I just carry on now? Okay, right. I'm going to give a sermon now. If you're used to my sermons, it's a bit different. My sermons are a bit different. Well, this is going to be even more different. So I've got a slideshow, which I'd like to bring up now. So this is about maunga, or mountains. Great. It's going to be a bit of a reflection. I'm going to think about all sorts of things, but I'm going to first of all give you a little quiz. So what's this first mountain? Anyone? Everest, the biggest mountain we've got, 8,849 meters. That's nearly 9 kilometers high, okay? Pretty high. a great and lofty mountain. What about this next mountain? Mount Cook. Any other names for it? Aoraki or Aorangi. Okay, if you're from down south, you'd say Aoraki, because that's the way they say the NG word. If you're from up north, you'd say Aorangi. Does anybody know what Aorangi means? Cloud piercer. Ao means world, and the rangi is sky. So it is a cloud piercer, the world of the clouds, world of the sky. Cool. Now, this next mountain symbolizes something else about mountains. Sometimes they can be dangerous. Who can name this mountain? No, it's not Vesuvius. It's not Mount Sinai. No, it's not the one in Hawaii. I think I heard somebody say it. Mount Doom, or Druin, or Amon Amrath, or Mount Doom from the Lord of the Rings. I've given it a height there. Okay, if you haven't seen the movie, you might not recognize it, but this is Mount Doom. One of the things about mountains is that they're quite visible. And when Frodo and Sam were making their epic voyage to destroy the Ring of Power in Mount Doom, when they got past another range of mountains, they could see where they were heading. So mountains are like landmarks. And I think they're pretty big landmarks. Frodo and Sam didn't need a map to go to Mount Doom. Oh, that's that big smoking thing over there. Right, that's where we're heading. Does anybody know why it's got 2,291 meters as the height? It came from the film. Do you know what mountain they based it on? Ngauruhoe. That's the height of Mount Ngauruhoe. Okay, so because they filmed it in New Zealand. Right, there are also mountains in Israel. And as we've talked about, there are lots of references to mountains. So here's some mountains from Israel. See if you can work out which ones these are. Which one? Mount Zion, the holy hill. That's in Jerusalem, okay? It's only 765 meters. So it's not that big. Okay, the next mountain. This one's a little bit taller. I think it might be the highest mountain in Israel. Was that? Hermon? No, it's not Mount Hermon. I think Hermon's in Lebanon now. It's actually Mount Samaria, which is where the Northern Kingdom had their capital city in Mount Samaria. This next one, anybody know? No, it's not Masada, but that would have been a great mountain to have. Okay, Masada does look a bit like this. It's long and flat. This is Mount Carmel, and on Mount Carmel, Elijah made a sacrifice to God while all these other priests tried to make a sacrifice to another god, Baal, and they failed, and Elijah's sacrifice got burnt up. And he looked out from there to the sea and saw rain coming. Notice the height, it was only 546 meters, pretty small by New Zealand standards. This one, perhaps the most significant mountain, anybody guess? Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. So it's not in Israel, but it's 2,285 meters high. It got mentioned before that sometimes mountains were used for some bad things. They were used to worship other gods. Sometimes they're called high places in the Bible, places of sacrifice, and they weren't always sacrifices to God. So there's some other things that were done. This next mountain, we might call it a hill, 797 meters. It's taller than Mount Zion. Does anyone know which mountain or hill this is? Maungatautari, okay, which is fairly close by. I'm now going to give my pepeha. Ko Maungatautari, toko maunga. You can go back a slide. Okay, ko Mangatalkuri, toku mana. Ko Waikato, toku awa. Ko Adelaide, rawa ko Captain Cook, toku waka. Ko Ngāti Pākehā, rawa ko Ngāti Akoti, rawa ko Ngāti Inari, toku iwi. Might get this, have to look this bit up. E noho ana au ki kirikiri roa. Ko Stuart Millar, toku papa. Ko Judy Christie, toku mama. Ko Ross Millar, toku ingoa. I said that mountains are like landmarks. And it's a way of locating ourselves. So in Māori culture, you give a pepeha and people know where you come from. So my mountain is Mangatalkuri. I was born in Matamata, or Hobbiton now, and I grew up in Cambridge. So that's the mountain I call my mountain. Waikato is my awa, my river. Captain Cook is one of the waka, my waka. It's not the Endeavour, it is the Captain Cook. Adelaide is another waka. My earliest ancestors were Pākehā, and they came out to New Zealand. Well, my earliest New Zealand ancestors arrived in New Zealand in 1840 in March in Petone, and they came on board a boat called the Adelaide. My father came out to New Zealand in the 1950s on a boat called the Captain Cook. So it is right for me to say that Captain Cook is my waka. I'm actually a first, second, third, fourth, and sixth generation New Zealander. I live in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. My father's name was Stuart Millar, and my mother's maiden name was Judy Christie. That's part of where I come from. My name is Ross Millar. One of the landmarks in my life and part of my identity is as a New Zealander. But part of my identity as a New Zealander means reflecting on Māori culture. Even though I'm not Māori myself, I reflect on that. So my iwi are Ngāti Pākehā, Ngāti Akoti, which is Scottish, and Ngāti Inari. I've got a little bit of English in me. Okay. I want to mention that as part of my journey on dealing with Te Tiriti o Waitangi and how I relate to other people. All ethnicities will come to God. I think we go to the next slide now, Sam. This is a Māori whakatauki. Whaia te iti kahurangi ki te tuahu koe me ki maunga tete. Kahurangi, does anybody know what the word kahurangi means? It's a color. It's a color for blue, but it also means precious, really like a gem. Seek the treasure you value most dearly. That's that kahurangi. If you must bow down, make sure it is to a lofty mountain. This whakatauki is telling us to really go for something big and what we treasure, and don't let anything get in the way. And if something does get in the way, let it be something really, really big, a lofty mountain. Let's move on to the next slide. Will there be mountains in the new creation? I'll give you 30 seconds to come up with a yes or no answer. Quick in your groups. Will there be mountains in the new creation? Okay. Okay. Groups, roughly, how many groups thought yes? How many groups thought no? Oh, we don't know. Okay, that's probably a safe answer. We don't know. Okay, good answer. Okay. There are passages in the Bible which talk about every hill being made low and every valley filled up to make a level road for the Lord to come on. So I was thinking that. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare a way for the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every mountain shall be raised, every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low, and the rough ground shall become level. And then the glory of the Lord will be revealed. Let's go to the next slide. This is a passage from Revelation. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. A new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. The sea in Revelation is a symbol of chaos. So there's no chaos, there's order. I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, coming down to the world. Prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. Guess what? Beautifully dressed is that cosmetic word. Like the cosmos, beautifully adorned. We don't think of cosmos as being a decoration, but this is one of those decorations. And I think that's part of the idea that why there will be no sea in heaven. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place, heaven, is now among the people. And he will dwell with them. That word dwell is like the word for tent or tabernacle. In the Old Testament, God moved around in a tent. And that was his dwelling. So God's tent is coming down into our new world. They will be his people, his humans, and God himself will be there with them and will be their God. There's another bit in Revelation which I'm going to try and tell you as a story, and it comes from a little bit later in this chapter. So if you can go to the next slide. And one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls filled with the seven last plagues came and he said to me, come, and I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. That's Jesus. And he took me in the spirit to a great and lofty mountain. There will be at least one mountain in heaven, in the new earth. And he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. And the glory of God shone around. And its radiance was like a precious jewel. And its walls were jasper, but crystal clear. And its walls were great and lofty. The same description as that mountain. And I want you to pause here. John is standing with an angel on top of this great and lofty mountain. And he sees the holy city come down. And he looks at its length. And then he looks at its width. And then he looks down from his great and lofty mountain. And he looks up. These walls are humongous. And the city had 12 gates. And by the gates were 12 angels, and inscribed on the gates were the names of the 12 tribes, the sons of Israel. And there were 3 gates to the east, 3 gates to the north, 3 gates to the south, and 3 to the west. And there were the walls were built on 12 foundations. And on these 12 foundations were inscribed the 12 names of the apostles of the Lamb. And the angel had a gold measuring stick to measure the length of the city, the size of the city, and the size of its walls, and the size of its gates. And the city was square, a perfect square. And the length of the city was 12,000 stadia. And its width was the same as its length, and its height was the same as its length. How big's a stadia? How big's a stadium? That's the whole thing. That's 12,000 stadiums. Has anybody been to Rugby Park? Mark probably has. Okay. The length of that stadium is probably, it's a modest sized stadium, would you say? Okay. 600 Greek feet. I'm not sure what shoe size Achilles had. It's probably size 12, given the number of 12s in Revelation. But this is huge. He had to measure it with a gold measuring stick, which was this long. How long would it have taken him? A long time. If you count 12,000 stadia, and I reckon that's 2 feet to 1 cubit, which was the measure he was measuring, that's 300 times 12,000, which is 3.6 million. To count up to 1 million, you can't do that going at the rate of 1 per second in your lifetime. So he had to measure 3 ways: the length, the width, the height. That was going to take about 1,000 years if he was using this measuring stick. These are big numbers. Sam, can you go to the next slide? Okay, right. Just to give you a bit of an idea of the scale, can you see that where those little arrows are pointing, there's a little very faint line? That is not 1, but 20 Mount Everests. Now, Everest is nearly 9 kilometers high, so 10 kilometers, 20 Mount Everests make up 1/10 of the height of that thing, that city. This is humongous. I have questions. How did they measure the height of the city? Very long ladder. Angels have got wings. Okay, that's probably part of the answer. But do angels have oxygen tanks? Because if you get up to the top of Mount Everest, the oxygen is getting thin. And this is 200 times the height of Mount Everest. If this was like the wall, you'd have an intercontinental ballistic missile trying to fire into the wall to get over the wall. Intercontinental ballistic missiles fly at 400 kilometers high, so they get. But of course, this is new heaven and new earth, and there's going to be nothing disgusting like intercontinental ballistic missiles there. This is huge. Go to the next slide, Sam. This is if the city in Revelation was put on Jerusalem, that's how much of the earth it would cover. The earth's diameter is about 12,500 kilometers. This is 2,000 kilometers. So that's going to go right up into Turkey, down into Egypt, way out into the Mediterranean Sea. And it looks as though it's getting over into Iran just about. This city is huge, yeah. Right, let's go on to the next slide. I'll carry on. It is the same one, but that's okay, because I'm going to carry on with the story. And the angel took his measuring stick, which was a human measuring stick, this length, and he measured the thickness of the walls, and they were 144 cubits. Can anyone tell me what 144 is? 65 meters, that's brilliant, okay? About the length of a rugby field, or 3/4 of the way of a rugby field. But can anyone tell me what 144 is? Does anybody know their 12 times table? 12 times 12. Do you know how many 12s there are in this passage? There's 10 plus 2 in the 144. This is not, I don't think it's meant to be an exact measurement. It's meant to be a measurement of inspiration and wonder. It's a perfect measurement. So 144 cubits. And its walls were like jasper, and the city was like pure gold, and the walls were like glass, pure glass. How does God make walls that are see-through? Perhaps the question we should be asking is, why does God make walls that are see-through? Any thoughts on that? Just keep them tight, because I think we'll get to the answer. And the city was decorated with decorated, that word for cosmetic, with 12 foundation stones. And the first was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th, at number 12 again, amethyst. And each gate, there were 12 pearls, and each gate was made from a single pearl. And the streets of the city were made of pure gold, like see-through glass. I've got some questions. Where did God find the oysters for those pearls? And what's he going to do with them now that there's no sea? Perhaps they were freshwater oysters that go into the river of life, but they must have been huge. I don't imagine those as being small gates. They might have been gates the size of this hall. These are big gates for lots of people to come through. This is huge. There is no temple in that city, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. And the city has no need for sun or moon. God is its light, and the Lamb is its lamp. Jesus is its lamp. And the city shines with the glory of God, and the people, the different nations, the different ethnicities were able to come and walk in its light. I think the reason for the walls of the city being clear is not so that we can see in. Well, it's perhaps so that the nations can see in. But the light of God shines around the whole world. I am amazed at how God can make walls that are 2,000 kilometers high. I think the highest building in the world hardly reaches 1 kilometer. These are amazing thoughts. The kings and the queens of the earth, of the nations, brought tribute, their glory and their honor to the city. And the gates are never shut because there's no night. And the different peoples, the different ethnicities, Maori, Pākehā, Samoan, Pacifica, Cambodian, Chinese, everybody. They brought their glory and their honor to the city. And there was nothing terrible, nothing disgusting, and nothing false that could enter the city. No one except those whose names were written in the book of the Lamb of Life. Here's my thoughts on mountains, on cosmos, and I'd like to suggest that Maungatautari is my maunga, but this is another landmark in my life. As a Christian, I look forward to going to the new creation, where heaven comes down and meets the world, and the new heaven and the new earth become the new cosmos, and it's going to be beautiful.